There you go. Jack Smith named special counsel in both of these Trump probes ongoing by the Justice Department. John, obviously that is the news that we were expecting. No questions are being taken at the DOJ at this time, but widespread implications for what was just announced.
Yeah, there's no question about that. Jack Smith, quite a well-known prosecutor, has handled a lot of high-profile political cases, been working at the International Criminal Court at The Hague, as Merrick Garland alluded to there, and he'll be coming back from the Netherlands soon to assume his responsibilities here. Let's get some more analysis on this. Shannon Bream's anchor of Fox News Sunday and our chief legal correspondent. So we got your chief legal correspondent hat on with all of this, because the point has been made that this investigation will not just be about the documents at Mar-a-Lago. This is about January the 6th. People could face charges as a result of this special prosecution, including the former president, including some Republican lawmakers, potentially. And if that were to happen in a narrow majority in the House, could this investigation potentially change the balance of power in Congress?
It could have very broad tentacles. I mean, that's definitely the case. When you look at whether or not they consider charges of somebody obstructing the ability to hold a joint session of Congress, those would be things that would come up with the January 6th investigation. But very interesting that what the Attorney General said was this will be done quickly. Now, our definition of quickly and what the rest of the world thinks of as quickly when it comes to these kinds of investigations may be very different. But he noted a lot of work has already done. Jack Smith is going to pick up where that has been and add to it, continue the investigation from there. But he noted that we are in such a unique situation because not only do you have the former president announcing his candidacy, he said that really pushed this, and the fact that the current president has announced he intends to be a candidate too, it sounds like that left him nowhere to go, but he felt in his judgment as special counsel.
Yeah. Shannon, great to get your immediate reaction there. We've also got Jonathan Turley and Gerry Baker standing by. Jonathan Turley, to you now for your reaction from what you just heard, what this means going forward.
Smith is a solid appointment. I don't think you're going to find many critics. He has an extensive legal background, a great deal of experience across the board, from public integrity to international cases. It is interesting, you know, the Attorney General referred to obstruction a couple of times. That's really where the greatest concern probably will lie for the Trump team. I mean, the scope of this is going to contain both the January 6th riot and the election, as well as Mar-a-Lago. As I said earlier, we still haven't seen a very strong basis for any criminal charges linked to the January 6th riot. On Mar-a-Lago, the past cases, even the most egregious cases, like case, have resulted in relatively light criminal charges. That is for possessing or removing classified evidence. That is not the case with obstruction. So when we're talking about obstruction, that is something that can come and has historically come with significant penalties. So I think that the scope of this investigation is going to be a serious concern, obviously. Anytime a special counsel is appointed, it concentrates the mind of every attorney involved. But I think most of us are really looking still at Mar-a-Lago as where those torpedoes in the water are probably most menacing.
Well, let me just get back, if I could, Jonathan, to the question I asked Shannon. That is potentially the political implications of any kind of prosecution of January the 6th. You said you don't see a lot of evidence for bringing criminal charges, but with these special counsel investigations, you never know what rabbit holes they're going to go down. I mean, again, with this narrow majority that we're expecting in the House, if charges were to be brought against lawmakers that could potentially change the balance of power in the House, that throws this into an entirely different political realm.
It certainly can. The January 6th committee really was a fight in the political arena, and it came with all of the questions as to the authority and jurisdiction and history of one party hammering another. This is a special counsel. He is entitled to pursue the evidence wherever it may lead, and that is going to complicate things in Congress. What we haven't seen in January 6th is something that really moved significantly the allegations of a crime linked to President Trump. Much of the discussion was the speech that he gave that day. Some of us criticized that speech while it was being given. But I still believe that speech is constitutionally protected, and I don't believe a special counsel can base a charge on it. The question is whether they can find charges related to interfering with the election and the aftermath of the riot. Merrick Garland referred to both. He referred to the scope as including efforts to subvert the election. That potentially includes states like Georgia, which have their own criminal investigation, and you could now have a dual investigation looking into some of those questions.
Based on what Jonathan just said, bring in Gerry Baker from the Wall Street Journal here. You and I have copies of the order right in front of us appointing this John Smith as special counsel. In line B, I highlighted, saying exactly what Jonathan Turley just highlighted. The special counsel is authorized to conduct the ongoing investigation into whether any person or entity violated the law in connection with efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following the 2020 presidential election, or the certification of the Electoral College vote held on or about January 6, 2021. So huge legal implications that we just discussed. And considering the players involved, Gerry, potentially huge political implications as well.
Yeah, and I think, look, exactly, that was the language that I was most struck by, too, that it isn't just about, this part of the investigation is not just about January the 6th. You know, the president's speech, I mean, as Jonathan Turley has said, it's going to be pretty hard, I think, to find a criminal case in your freedom, free speech is protected in that way. But this is much broader than that. This is about the whole effort, it says, to interfere with the lawful transfer of power following the 2020 election. So, you know, that goes for everything from, you know, potentially, you know, all those meetings that we heard about that Trump was having at the White House with all his advisors and these various different schemes they were coming up with to try to overturn the results. It does go to issues, as Jonathan said, like the attempts to interfere in the Georgia, the count there. It seems to me, in potentially very, very broad this, where the Mar-a-Lago investigation seems pretty narrow and pretty clear, and that's, you know, the extent to which the president, you know, the former president did or didn't essentially comply with the Presidential Records Act and some other matters relating to that. But there's a pretty discrete set of set of evidence and witnesses. This broad investigation into efforts to interfere with the lawful transfer of power is potentially quite broad. And again, I did hear the Attorney General say they want to do this quickly, but there's a lot of people involved. As you say, there's a lot of people involved. There's a lot of people, a lot of events, a lot of meetings, a lot of documents presumably relating to that I think are going to be, and also politically very, very significant. I mean, the interesting question here is, you know, the president, Jonathan Turley says everybody will approve of Jack Smith's appointment, nobody will object to him. Well, the former president certainly will, and how he chooses to use this for his own political opportunity will become also quite a big issue in the course of the next few weeks.
And John, just reading through the letter from the Justice Department, you know, detailing the background of Special Counsel Jack Smith, last line of it, his work as special counsel begins immediately.
Yeah, and Shannon, I wanted to drill down on this idea of Merrick Garland saying he wants this to happen quickly. I don't remember a special counsel investigation that happened on a schedule that didn't even resemble the word quickly.
Yeah, I think that they're very aware of the public perception that this is going to go on through a presidential election, which frankly is already underway. There is always that discussion about they don't do things 60 days out from an election because they don't want to interfere with the election, but it's already on. People are running and people have said they are running, so they're in the middle of a political cycle now. That's just inevitable, and that's where they find themselves. So as we talked about, quickly can be different things to different people, but this special prosecutor, Jack Smith, has a running start. These two investigations he's going to pick up on have already been well underway, so it is not as if he has to start from scratch now. There is a running start for him, essentially.
Okay, Jonathan, so in your view, knowing that we didn't know this was happening until a short time before it actually did, is appointing a special counsel at this time, is this what you expected? Is this the right thing to do?
I did expect it, and I think it is the right thing to do. I also think the right thing to have been done was an appointment of a special counsel in Hunter Biden. The Attorney General mentioned two people who have said they are running for president. One of them is Joe Biden, and his name keeps on coming up as part of that investigation. And so I think that, as I've said before, it is the case for a special counsel in that matter, in my view, is also unassailable. But there's really sort of risks on all sides here. You know, if this moves quickly, as clearly Garland wants it to, you could have the president being cleared of criminal conduct with regard to January 6th, but potentially face charges on Mar-a-Lago. So you could have a mixed bag, but any charge of a person running currently for office is going to be devastating for most voters. And so I think Garland is signaling that he understands that this race has started, but that I think he's signaling that he wants to see a result before 2024. And maybe they'll just look at that 60-day period before the actual election as the thing that's going to motivate their compliance with that guideline. So I just picked up that from my own view, and I have no basis for assuming this, that Garland wants to see this thing wrapped up, if possible, before then. But he doesn't have an inkling, I expect, as to what the special counsel will ultimately uncover. So regardless of what expectations or hopes may be, there's only one person now that will dictate that schedule, and his name is Jack Smith.
And he probably has no clue at this point, Jonathan, just how many pieces of wool he's going to pull on. We had Shannon with her legal hat on a second ago. Let's put your political hat, your Fox News Sunday hat on here, because we are going to have the special counsel investigation. Then when Republicans take over Congress at the beginning of January, we're going to have an investigation of Joe Biden. We're going to have an investigation of the origins of COVID, Afghanistan, a number of other things as well. Democrats are going to be, I'm sure, be hammering on the special counsel investigation every opportunity they can to try to cast aspersions on President Trump, and Republicans. You're going to have Republicans doing their investigations, which will not reflect favorably, I'm sure, on the Democrats. We got a recipe here for a lot of political heat in Washington, D.C., at least in the next year, I would think.
Yeah, if you like C-SPAN and hearings, and you're going to have a ton of them that you'll be able to watch on both sides of the aisle, probably. I mean, Republicans over in the House have said they can walk and chew gum at the same time. There's been pressure on them, like, don't do, quote unquote, crazy investigations. Be about passing bills that help Americans. They're going to say there's only so much we can do on that front because we can't get things through the Senate substantively too much. And the president keeps talking about his veto pen. So they're going to do these investigations. The question to me politically is whether President Trump actually takes this and leverages it to his advantage. He's been very good about talking about the elites and the deep state going after him. That motivates his base. So this is just another iron in that fire for him to say, look, yet another investigation of me. They're coming after you through me. They're trying to stop me. You got to vote for me. So I think he can play this both ways politically, but it's going to be a very, very busy time for lawyers. There are an abundance of them, no shortage here in Washington, D.C., and they're going to have a lot of work the next couple of years.
A busy time for all. Gerry Baker, to you, we did just hear from the Wall Street Journal. You are from the White House. It was right before the actual announcement happened, but the White House putting out a statement via an official. DOJ makes decisions about its criminal investigations independently, and we are not involved. So I would refer you to the DOJ for any questions on this. The DOJ did not take any questions. Certainly there will be many, though, as we move into this.
There will, yeah. And of course, you would expect the White House to say that. And, you know, they are trying to insulate, as the whole point of the special counsel is obviously trying to insulate themselves from accusations that this is a politically motivated investigation. And of course, again, if crimes were committed, then they need to be investigated. But I do agree. I mean, I agree with Shannon that the president will exploit this, unquestioned, the former president, for his own advantage. He'll say, look, I'm being persecuted once again. He was, in his very declaration the other night, he presented himself as a victim, and he will use this as another example of that. And the fact is, many people will believe that. Actually, this is the unfortunate situation we're in. Whatever the actual rights and wrongs, whatever we find out from this investigation, many people will simply believe this is just yet another attempt by Donald Trump's enemies to use the law to pursue him, to pursue what is a political cause. Whether or not that's right, that is unfortunately how a very large number of people will see it, and it will probably rebound to his benefit politically in that respect.
Jerry, have you been reading my Twitter feed? It's exactly what people are saying. Yeah. We're going to take a quick break. Gerry, Jonathan, and Shannon, good to see you.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.